In this video, we're going to take a look at the HDR toning adjustment, which is a destructive operation you can perform on your pixels that will only work if your document has been flattened. So if you have a bunch of layers, it simply won't work. It's going to want to crush all of that down. Generally, it's a good idea because of that to do this in a brand new version of your document if you're using multiple layers. Now, the point of the HDR toning adjustment is to give you that HDR kind of surreal effect. If you've ever seen HDR photographs that kind of have that interesting glow and very interesting lighting style to them, you can mimic that using the HDR toning adjustment. So let's take a look at that. We'll go in our image adjustments and we see HDR toning. And here we go. Now there are several presets you can play with, and I highly recommend you play with them because they're pretty cool. We have, for instance, flat is pretty boring. I don't much care for it. But monochromatic artistic is kind of cool, a little bit unexpected. We have, what are some of the cooler ones? Photorealistic is an interesting one. It looks kind of terrible on this particular picture, but if you try it with pictures that came fresh out of a digital camera, you can get some interesting effects. We have surrealistic high and low contrast, so you start to get that kind of fuzzy soft effect that is pretty common in a lot of HDR shots. So what I'm going to do is switch this back over to default, and this is what you get when you first open the thing up. Now you have your method for this toning operation. Most of the time you're going to leave this set to local adaptation. However, there are some other methods as well. There's exposure and gamma, which anytime you see exposure, that's just brightening and darkening your image. Anytime you see gamma, you can pretty much guarantee that's going to be controlling the midtones of your image. So, and that's really all you're doing here. You can darken the midtones, you can lighten the midtones, and that's pretty straightforward. Next, you have highlight compression. This is going to take the brighter areas of your image and it's going to kind of squeeze those down so you don't get any super bright brights. Next, we have equalize histogram. This is just going to, I don't want to say normalize because that's not really right, but it's going to give you a more even spread of pixels across your image. Again, though, there are no options for this. And then you have local adaptation, which is the default method, and there are a whole lot of settings for it. Now, the first group you have access to is Edge Glow. This gives you that nice little glowy effect around the edges of your images, which is fairly common in your HDR shots if you've ever taken a look at them. What you get is strength is just how much glow you're actually getting, and then radius is how far around those edges that glow is allowed to exist. So as you play with this, you can get some really, really wicked results. So if I kind of tighten up my radius, you can start to see I've got a little bit of glow taking place here over the trees. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with that. A really good idea if you're totally new to playing with this is to start adjusting some of the presets and seeing what is being done with Edge Glow in particular through some of the really cool effects that are set to presets. Next, we have tone and detail. These control the tone across the entire image. Gamma is going to be your midtones once again. So you can see we can darken up the midtones, or we can really blow the midtones out. We have overall exposure we can play with. So we can make things really dark or make it look like a nuclear weapon just went off. We have detail. Now this shows, this exposes the detail that's actually in the image. It's kind of like an adjustment for contrast in a way. If you crank this up, your image is going to start to look highly contrasted in areas of detail. I've heard this referred to as crunchy before. And you can see the effect that's giving. As a matter of fact, it's starting to make the rocks kind of look like they're covered in snow in a way, but overall it just looks kind of, well, terrible if you crank it up too far. Next we have our shadows, and this is going to control the area of the darkened areas of your image. So you can see the shadow here along the rocks as I adjust the slider. Those are getting brighter and darker. And then we have the same thing for highlights. So we can boost those up or we can kick those down. So definitely, come in here and play with these. If I bring highlights down, of course, I can get a nicer tone out of the sky. Of course, by bringing that down, I can make that edge glow a lot more apparent. So now, since we've done that, since the sky is a whole lot darker, if I bring the radius for the edge glow down a little bit, now you can really see that glow around all of our edges because I've really cranked the strength up so things just look a little bit insane there. We'll go ahead and pull that back up just a tad. Now we also have color controls, so we can boost vibrance, which is kind of like a clipped version of saturation. You do want to be careful with this and not crank it up too far because it looks really obvious. Or we can desaturate using vibrance. And then we have true saturation, which is not going to be clipped. And using this, you really can take your colors and just blow them completely out of the spectrum or completely desaturate to nothing. Finally, we have a toning curve and histogram. This is kind of like a very simplified version of the curves adjustment layer. The standards are you can make an upward upward curve, kind of an ease in for lighter images. Of course, you can do an ease out if you want to do darker images. You can do a standard S-curve if you want to increase your contrast, or you can do an inverted S-curve if you want to lower your contrast. And that's just kind of like the basics. Of course, you can make all kinds of crazy results by really waggling that curve around and adding a lot of points to it. Any one of those points, if you so desire, you can select and switch to a corner so that you can start getting some even weirder effects. So that's a look at all of the settings for HDR toning. Again, it's just a way to take that sort of surreal look that often comes out of HDR photographs and mimic that up in just about any picture. But that's going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.